On national television, Ilhan Omar brazenly insulted Secretary Rubio by calling him a messenger for a lobbying group right in front of the entire country. He is the child of Cuban exiles, and his hardworking mother made a living cleaning hotel rooms. She directed this harsh insult squarely at the proud son of a working-class maid. Rather than raising his voice in anger, he calmly opened a file and recited 3 of her past statements along with one she had quietly erased. She has entirely avoided giving any public interviews since that specific confrontation. Prior to the Secretary speaking, I feel compelled to clarify the true underlying purpose of this committee hearing. Ilhan Omar sat with perfect posture, angling her chin with the practiced precision of a woman who understands that physical geometry projects an image of innocent composure on camera. Her headscarf was flawlessly positioned, and her hands were perfectly spaced near the microphone, carefully arranged like a delicate display meant only for visual impact rather than casual resting. This proceeding has absolutely nothing to do with fighting prejudice, but rather focuses entirely on quieting a Muslim woman who actively critiques Israeli policies. This has always been their true motive, and the nation's top diplomat using his authority for such political theater clearly reveals his actual underlying priorities. She rotated to look directly at Rubio, moving with the calculated precision of someone carefully aiming a weapon they had been loading all day. The Secretary occupies that seat to discuss displaced people, so please allow me to properly educate you on real refugees. I resided in a displacement camp for 4 years, drinking contaminated water that sickened my brother while sleeping on a hard concrete floor inside a doorless room. Your family fled Cuban oppression, yet you proudly sit here defending a foreign administration that actively subjugates the Palestinian population in the exact same manner. The profound hypocrisy of this situation is glaringly obvious to absolutely everyone in this room except for you. She stopped speaking momentarily, using the silence not to breathe but to carefully take aim, much like an archer holding a drawn bow before letting go. We desperately need to speak honestly regarding your true motivations for attending today. You are completely unconcerned about actual prejudice, and you certainly never lose sleep over the safety of Jewish neighborhoods. You attended simply because a lobbying group demanded it, driven entirely by the wealthy donors who financed both your Senate run and your remarkably brief presidential bid. Her tone adopted a distinctly sharp quality, revealing that she had meticulously prepared her verbal attack and locked onto her intended target. You function as nothing more than their obedient messenger, Secretary Rubio. She allowed the statement to linger before expanding upon it, transforming a simple insult into a highly vivid and insulting visual scenario. You deliver their demands, ring the doorbell, and happily collect your payment, which is your well-known historical reputation throughout the entire political capital. A subtle and private grin followed her remark, reflecting the quiet satisfaction of someone who felt her harshness was fully justified and deeply enjoyable. I respect that your mother was a hotel housekeeper, just as my own mother swept floors in a foreign land, but she never acted as a servant for political lobbyists. She slightly adjusted the angle of her head while challenging him to reflect on whether he could truthfully make that identical claim. An aide sitting behind Omar smugly repositioned a binder, moving with the arrogant confidence of someone preparing a victorious social media update. She had directly insulted the nation's top diplomat, a man whose mother scrubbed hotel rooms precisely so he could achieve his current position. He still had not opened his folder, which contained 3 of her past public remarks alongside one she had quickly erased. Marco Rubio remained completely motionless with his hands resting flat on the table, creating a striking contrast between his physical stillness and her verbal cruelty that only the cameras could truly capture.
His jaw tightened visibly, displaying the immense effort and control of a man firmly holding back his emotions until the perfect moment to release them. 4 long seconds passed, and then 5. He stared right at her, using a profound gaze that indicated he was carefully calculating exactly how much of his true self to reveal to the room. Addressing her directly, his voice dropped to a much softer volume than the familiar political tone he had confidently used for 2 decades. He spoke with his authentic underlying voice, the one rooted in his working-class childhood where his immigrant parents struggled daily to keep the household lights on. You proudly insulted me as a delivery boy on national television while my young children were watching from home. He allowed that statement to linger in the quiet room completely unsupported, letting the heavy silence amplify the emotional weight of his words. The very woman you just referenced, my mother, spent 11 exhausting years cleaning hotel rooms at a prominent Miami Beach resort. She tirelessly scrubbed toilets and carried heavy towels for wealthy guests who never bothered to learn her actual name. Working at the same location, my father poured drinks for patrons who tipped poorly and rudely refused to learn his real name. My parents arrived from Cuba sharing a single suitcase, dedicating their immense labor entirely to their children rather than wealthy political donors. They sacrificed endlessly to ensure their son could eventually hold a position of true national significance. They certainly did not struggle so he could be insulted by a politician who routinely smears her opponents with inflammatory labels. He slowly and deliberately opened his file, moving with the patient confidence of a man preparing to deliver a massive rhetorical blow. I will ignore that insult because this hearing focuses solely on the damaging public statements you made under your own identity. You decided to call me an obedient lobbyist messenger, which is completely fine. Pulling the first document from his file, he announced his intention to deliver a few facts of his own. Inside a modest apartment located straight in Ilhan Omar's Congressional district, an older woman named Rachel Abramson adjusted her television volume. As a longtime local seamstress, the elderly woman had spent decades altering clothes for loyal neighborhood clients she knew personally. Shortly after the Congresswoman posted her controversial social media remark, a vandal painted a deeply offensive symbol on Rachel's storefront window. Local law enforcement filed a standard report regarding the vandalism, yet they never managed to arrest any suspects. A maintenance worker quietly scrubbed the glass without asking about the hateful image, and Rachel remained silent because explaining such prejudice is always completely exhausting. She tuned into the broadcast specifically because the politician represented her local district, despite her personal voting preferences. Resting her hands patiently on her lap, she quietly muttered to herself as she waited to hear the secretary's next words. Reading from the top document, Rubio stated the specific date with the cold precision of a prosecutor presenting a formal legal charge. He noted that she had publicly posted a controversial phrase suggesting political motivations were entirely driven by money. You justified congressional support for a foreign ally by using offensive financial tropes commonly directed at Jewish individuals. The Congresswoman fired back immediately with a highly polished and deeply rehearsed defense mechanism she had used many times before. She kept her hands perfectly positioned on the desk, refusing to break her meticulously maintained physical posture. She claimed she was merely criticizing a political lobby group, arguing there is a massive difference between opposing a lobbying firm and displaying prejudice. She smugly expressed her hope that the nation's highest diplomat could successfully comprehend that basic distinction. Rather than engaging in a petty argument, Rubio simply moved on and turned to the second piece of paper. He then read a past social media post where she claimed a foreign nation had hypnotized the entire globe to hide its evil actions. Her right hand finally broke its perfect posture to grip the table edge, betraying her sudden and intense internal discomfort. She frantically interrupted to claim she was only discussing military operations, insisting that critiquing military action was completely acceptable. Rubio immediately cut her off with another date, pressing his clear rhetorical advantage without waiting for her weak defense to conclude. He noted her public comments promoting the dual loyalty myth, which remains one of the oldest and most damaging prejudices against Jewish citizens. She exhibited a microscopic physical flinch that briefly betrayed her hidden anxiety, a subtle reaction visible on video but lost in written records. She desperately attempted to clarify that she was merely criticizing the general expectation of political loyalty. Rubio ignored her excuse and placed the three printed documents side by side, perfectly aligning the three damaging statements for maximum visual effect. These three separate quotes, spanning multiple years, all push the identical harmful narrative about hidden financial and political control. Folding his hands firmly, he acknowledged that a single instance might be a mistake, and two instances might merely be coincidental. He stared at her with the deep patience of a seasoned professional who understands that true behavioral patterns eventually reveal themselves clearly. Three separate incidents establish a definitive pattern, and such distinct patterns are never merely accidental. Watching from home, Rachel instinctively pressed her hands against her legs upon hearing the undeniable truth finally spoken aloud. That exact word validated her long-standing pain regarding a political leader whose careless rhetoric actively inspired local hate crimes. She had never before witnessed a public figure accurately label the behavior as a deliberate pattern rather than a simple misunderstanding. She absorbed the moment deeply, feeling the immense relief of finally hearing a suspected truth officially confirmed by a credible voice. Shifting to another date, Rubio lowered his voice to a highly serious tone reserved for discussing actual fatal tragedies. He noted her controversial description of the devastating terrorist attacks that brutally murdered thousands of innocent American citizens. He recited her exact quote claiming a civil rights group formed simply because certain unnamed individuals committed a vague action. Her voice immediately grew tight and defensive as she desperately claimed her words had been completely misinterpreted for years. He quickly countered that the full context actually proved his point by reducing a massive historical tragedy to a minor footnote. Your phrasing intentionally minimized the thousands of murdered victims in order to aggressively center your own political grievances. When she attempted to shout over him, he lowered his voice even further to cut firmly through her rising anger. You dismissed a horrific event that slaughtered innocent parents and heroic emergency responders by casually referring to it as just a vague incident. He paused entirely, slowing his famously rapid speaking style into a deeply reflective rhythm that sounded profoundly personal rather than strictly political. He then sincerely offered to share a deeply personal detail that he had never previously disclosed to the public. His polished political persona vanished completely, replaced by the raw authenticity of a normal person having a serious conversation. He vividly recalled being a young student sitting in a classroom when the second hijacked airplane struck the prominent tower. A neighboring classmate began crying intensely, instantly realizing that the entire world had permanently fractured and would never be the same again. Shortly after the Congresswoman published her offensive tweet, an unknown person spray-painted a defaced religious symbol onto Rachel's shop window. The local authorities arrived to take a formal statement, though they ultimately failed to apprehend any involved suspects. A property cleaner washed away the hateful imagery the following day without asking questions, and Rachel stayed quiet because explaining bigotry is utterly exhausting. She intentionally watched the evening proceedings because the politician nominally represented her community, regardless of her own political leaning. Resting her hands softly on her lap, she whispered to herself as she patiently waited for his next statement. Examining the first document, Rubio dictated the exact date with the severe precision of an attorney reading legal charges. He pointed out her online post suggesting that political allegiances were solely motivated by financial greed. You deliberately framed congressional support for a global ally by utilizing toxic financial stereotypes directly aimed at Jewish people. The representative answered immediately, relying on a highly rehearsed counter-argument she kept ready for these exact moments. She maintained her rigidly symmetrical hand placement, refusing to alter her meticulously crafted visual presentation. She insisted she was only condemning a political advocacy group claiming a massive distinction exists between lobbying criticism and pure bigotry. She mockingly declared her hope that the country's lead diplomat possessed the basic intelligence to recognize this difference. Avoiding a fruitless argument, Rubio simply remained quiet and proceeded to read from his second prepared document. He cited an older post where she alleged a foreign state had successfully hypnotized the entire world to mask its crimes. Her right hand finally slipped from its perfect stance to grasp the table, signaling a sudden surge of internal panic. She hurriedly protested that she was exclusively addressing military conflict, loudly arguing that criticizing armed forces was completely fair. Rubio quickly interrupted her defense with another specific date, confidently pressing his advantage as her excuses crumbled completely. He highlighted her remarks reinforcing the dual loyalty conspiracy, highlighting one of the most toxic and enduring prejudices against Jewish citizens. She displayed a tiny, involuntary physical flinch that briefly revealed her underlying stress, a reaction completely lost in the written transcript. She frantically tried to argue that she was only challenging the broader societal demand for unconditional political loyalty. Disregarding her defense, Rubio visually aligned the three printed pages to emphasize the three deeply problematic statements side by side. These three distinct comments over multiple years consistently promoted the exact same hateful narrative regarding hidden Jewish control and foreign loyalty. Clasping his hands tightly, he stated that while one comment might be an error, two could simply be a coincidence. He gazed at her with the seasoned patience of an experienced professional who knows that undeniable behavioral patterns always emerge eventually. Three occurrences create an undeniable pattern, and such established patterns are never just simple accidents. Observing the broadcast, Rachel physically pressed her hands onto her knees upon finally hearing that undeniable reality spoken aloud. That precise word perfectly captured the enduring trauma she felt regarding a local representative whose reckless statements encouraged regional hate crimes. She had never witnessed a public official correctly identify the behavior as a deliberate pattern rather than a harmless linguistic mistake. She took immense comfort in finally hearing an authoritative figure formally confirm the painful reality she had long suspected. Shifting gears completely, Rubio dramatically lowered his voice to effectively discuss an event involving mass casualties and immense tragedy. He referenced her controversial speech where she bizarrely described the massive terrorist attack that killed thousands of innocent Americans. He quoted her assertion that a specific civil rights organization launched because a few unnamed people engaged in an obscure activity. Her voice cracked with intense defensive anxiety as she immediately complained that her comments were maliciously taken out of context. He quickly shot back that reading the full context actually highlighted how she reduced a monumental tragedy to a minor historical footnote. Your phrasing purposely minimized thousands of slaughtered victims to aggressively prioritize your own personal political complaints instead. As she tried to forcefully talk over him, he lowered his voice even more to thoroughly dominate her rising anger. You callously dismissed a horrific tragedy that destroyed innocent families and brave emergency workers by calling it merely a vague incident. He ceased talking completely, breaking his usual rapid speaking rhythm to adopt a deeply solemn tone rooted purely in painful memory. He calmly offered to share a highly intimate personal story that he had completely kept hidden from the public eye beforehand. His seasoned political demeanor vanished instantly, making him appear simply as an ordinary man having a profoundly honest conversation. He distinctly remembered sitting inside a Miami classroom as a young teenager when the second passenger plane struck the massive tower. A nearby female classmate started weeping uncontrollably, immediately recognizing that their collective reality was permanently shattered and forever altered. That stark contrast highlights the massive difference between our respective backgrounds regarding how we responded upon finding refuge here. The Congresswoman opened her mouth to predictably argue that she had devoted her entire career to fighting for her local constituents. However, Rachel Abramson lived within that exact district, and her vandalized window proved exactly where that empty rhetoric inevitably led. She briefly attempted to claim misrepresentation again, but that excuse completely failed since he had already read her complete quotes aloud. Her chin dipped slightly downward, physically demonstrating the quiet submission of someone who had just been thoroughly dressed down publicly. She dropped her hands beneath the table entirely, completely unable to use her usual defensive tactics because her own words trapped her. She meekly stated she had nothing left to add, sitting entirely subdued after entering the room expecting a completely different outcome. The video clip of the exchange exploded online, quickly accumulating tens of millions of views over just a few short days. Viewers focused heavily on the deleted tweet and her nervous hand movements, sharing the footage wildly across all major social media platforms. Several allied politicians released defensive statements shortly afterward, while the Ethics Committee simultaneously launched a preliminary investigation into the entire matter. The initial delivery boy insult trended briefly before being completely eclipsed by her deeply problematic past statements for an entire week. Later that evening, Rachel turned off her television and immediately called her adult daughter, who lived comfortably in Chicago. Her daughter answered quickly and asked if she had just watched the explosive hearing on television. Rachel confirmed she had watched, noting that he had vaguely referenced her vandalized window without using her exact name. A heavy silence fell over the line, reflecting the unspoken pain they had shared for years regarding the ongoing local bigotry. Rachel quietly reminded her daughter that this controversial politician was technically supposed to be her primary congressional representative. Her daughter softly acknowledged the tragic reality of their situation before Rachel gently placed the phone back down on the table. She stared directly out her actual window overlooking the avenue, remembering the hateful vandalism committed by an unknown individual years ago. Although the glass was currently clear, she could still visualize the lasting emotional stain left permanently behind by the offensive graffiti. She quietly pulled the curtain shut while, down in Miami, Marco Rubio called his wife to discuss his proud working-class mother instead. His wife noted that his late mother would have been absolutely horrified by the profound disrespect displayed during the committee hearing. That incredible woman arrived with nothing yet deeply appreciated her new country, unlike the politician who maliciously labeled it as hypnotized. Back in Washington, Ilhan Omar sat alone at her table, staring quietly at the 4 printed screenshots saved on her personal laptop. She carefully reviewed the single deleted post that correctly acknowledged a foreign nation's fundamental right to defend its own sovereign borders. She distinctly recalled the quiet apartment where she had originally drafted that honest and nuanced thought before political pressures inevitably changed her. She had truly believed that original balance statement, but she cowardly erased it because honest nuance failed to generate lucrative political donations. Of the 4 printed pages, the one statement she had actively tried to erase was actually the most truthful thing she ever wrote. She retained 3 highly problematic statements but deleted the only one that fairly defended an allied nation simply because it hurt fundraising. She had arrogantly insulted the nation's top diplomat, fully knowing he was the proud son of a working-class hotel maid. Please subscribe and leave a thoughtful comment below regarding the immense emotional weight behind the powerful words shared in this story. Share this moving narrative with anyone who views the tragic September attacks as far more than just a vague historical incident. They truly deserve to hear the undeniable reality of this tense political confrontation described completely accurately and with appropriate solemn respect.